Comics and religion have always been strangely intertwined. Scott McCloud of Understanding Comics argues that hieroglyphics used by ancient Egyptian people could be considered a form of comic, or the more technical term of sequential art. Both use imagery and symbols to convey meaning in a visual sequence that creates a storyline for the reader to follow and understand. Take a look at stained glass windows on churches and you can find a similarity to this art form as well. There's also been times when comics were the targets of religion, such as 1950s America, where a psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent, arguing that violent and eerie imagery in comics would cause disorders in children such as drug use, murder, and even homosexuality. This led to moral panic of comics being burnt en masse and the Comics Code Authority being created to mitigate fears by excluding violence, drugs, and crime. But today we're looking at a closer union of comics and religion, with comics created by religious cults and the strange people who inhabit them. There's a lot of ways to define a cult, but Britannica defines a cult as usually a small group devoted to a person, idea, or philosophy. The term cult is often applied to a religious movement that exists in some degree of tension with the dominant religious or cultural inclination of a society. To try and simplify this, a cult separates from a standard religious group when its beliefs and practices make it difficult to exist within wider society or become antagonistic of it. Many cults deem modern society to have lost its way, be against human nature, or led by that ever-loaded term of degenerates.
People in the world who have thought that I had completely lost my marbles, they're not right.
One of the most famous comic propagandists is a man named Jack Chick. Chick was a believer of the King James Only movement, which, fitting to the name, acknowledged only the King James Version of the Bible. This version is an American English translation, deemed divinely inspired and rejecting all other interpretations. They're also highly tied to Baptist movements. For decades, his Chick tracts, as they're called, have served as the moral backbone for religious sects around the globe, in no small part due to aggressive missionary proselytizing, earning them the prestigious title of the most printed comics of all time. These parables promote their strict ideology through violence, horror, and outlandish cruelty. In one comic, a boy is forced to panhandle by his abusive father. When the boy fails to bring in much money, the father beats them bloody and throws them out of the house into the rain. The boy lies bleeding in an alleyway cardboard box. A woman passing out Jesus pamphlets that says, "Jesus loves you," comes by and goes for help. The boy reads one of the pamphlets, accepts Jesus into his heart, and immediately dies. But thankfully, he's shown going to heaven. So it seems the moral of this one is, at least you can go to heaven after your parent beats you to death. Another shows a child developing into a murderer because he discovers his parents lied about Santa Claus and becomes spiteful of the world, becoming a terrorist in line with Osama bin Laden. It seems the message is believing in imaginary stories is a gateway to sin. This would make millions of people who participate in Christmas violent murderers, including Superman.
We used to wrap his presents in lead foil so he couldn't peek.
You mean Santa wrapped them?
There's also duplicate versions of these comics that are all the same, except the characters are colored darker to make them black. They'd also change the titles as well to appeal more to the black community. These extremist views are what can make Chick tracts come off as comical, but it's the fact that for decades these have been consumed and their messages taken to heart by the masses. It's a chilling thought that I could be so close to people who believe Santa and Satan are the same thing. The way Chick tracts views Christianity isn't through a lens of love or charity. It's a thankless religion that cares not for you in life and provides only a positive alternative to hell and death. I don't find a religion super compelling if its biggest selling point is, join us or you'll go to the fire gulag for all eternity. It's more of a threat than anything. But shockingly, I found Chick tracts to not be the worst religious comics have to offer. Have you heard of the Children of God? They're also known as the Family International Christian religious movement founded by David Berg. This cult gained notoriety for its numerous charges of sexual abuse and prostitution, often sending its female members out to scout men for the group. even if that meant having sex with them. They encouraged sharing of women amongst members, even with girls as young as 14. Berg, often called father or daddy by his followers, wouldn't contact his flock directly, but instead through comics and media. One of their videos even made it onto an episode of Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst. These comics and videos were called Mo letters, named for David Berg, referring to himself as Moses. They gave his followers guidance and featured lurid illustrations of violence and sex, including with underage girls. One of the most shocking examples of this is featured in the documentary The Children of God. This girl was bedridden due to her disease and had nothing but books to occupy her time. However, the cult's rules forbade girls to read anything but the Bible or Mo letters. When the girl wrote to Berg asking for advice, he replied that she should pray more and that her desire to read was actually what was keeping her sick. Wanting to be loyal, she stopped reading entirely and stopped taking her medication, which was also not allowed in the cult. And unfortunately, she passed away. Berg made a Mo letter in response to this, where he drew himself going to heaven to meet her and then having sex with her. There's a lot about the vile deeds of this cult, and you can learn more about it in the Children of God documentary, featuring the family of the girl who passed away from illness, that goes further into the details. And those details are truly discomforting, to say the least. There are apparently over 2,000 of these comics, and while many of them aren't available online, their scripts can be found in the links below. While they aren't comics, there are Japanese cults that have anime and full-length movies. And not just some low-budget jank. I'm talking about multi-billion-dollar productions from the same people that do Dragon Ball and One Piece. But this video is more focused on Western comics, and there's a lot of far more talented YouTubers who have done videos on these animes, so go check them out when you have a chance. Back in the States, if you're American, you no doubt are aware of QAnon. What started on the image board 4chan as a user posting cryptic information and predictions about political figures, such as Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, turned into a movement that reached even beyond the borders of the US and in no small part contributed to the Capitol riot of Jan 6, 2021. The followers of QAnon are a hodgepodge of conspiracy theories ranging from flat earth to stolen elections to lizard people running the government. Being a movement born of internet culture, there are a plethora of memes and images pushing QAnon beliefs, many of which take the forms of comics. Even beyond that, I found a comic series called Alt Hero Q, created by far-right commentator Vox Day and Chuck Dixon, a comic author who has written mainline Batman comics for DC. Apparently these alt hero comics are a whole thing, and honestly I didn't want to get too deep into that rabbit hole. Maybe it's because I live in the US, and we're a predominantly Christian society. But so many of these cults, in some way or another, touch back on fundamentalist Christian conservative values. There's a running through line of modern society moving away from the traditional and natural teachings of the Protestant Church, such as heterosexuality, the nuclear family, sexual repression, gender conformity, and unfortunately a lot of white supremacy. Cutting through the wide range of the modern QAnon movement almost always brings you back to these American Christian values. I want to make clear, comics about religion or even promoting religion are not inherently bad. Godfather of manga Osamu Tezuka, notable for manga such as Astro Boy, made a manga called Buddha, following the life of the titular religious figure without promoting a zealous belief in Buddhism. The Action Bible continues to be a bestseller. Archie Comics largely featured Christian values and remained wholesome. Religion itself is not a bad thing. It gives guidance and hope to millions and has undeniably helped build our modern world for better or worse. One of my favorite religious comics is Will Eisner's A Contract with God. The story centers on Frim Hirsch, a Jewish immigrant to America who believed his good deeds and faith granted him the right to make a contract with God for good fortune. But when his adopted child dies, Frim curses God and renounces his faith to become a fat cat landlord. After much financial success, he visits a synagogue where he demands the rabbis craft a new, tighter contract. The rabbis oblige, but Frim quickly dies of a heart attack. The original contract, written on a stone, is found by a young boy who now believes he also has a contract with God. I like this story because it approaches good deeds and faith as something you should do, something that is just morally correct to do for your fellow man, and demanding rewards out of it as though it were some sort of profitable business deal is the wrong way to go. Everyone is equal. No one is free from tragedy or barred from success. No one has a contract with God. Comics have always been an effective way of spreading messages to the masses. Even if the Bible is too dense for many to read, the visual language of comics makes them simple to comprehend, so it makes sense that religious movements looking to spread from the bottom up would adopt this art form. If you've got any religious cult comics to mention, shout them out in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and before you go, I'd like to show you a trailer for my own original comic coming to Kickstarter later this month. This one featuring one of the most famous cults in America, the Ku Klux Klan.
1925, a bad year for Negroes. 10 years ago, a fella named D.W. Griffith puts out some noise he calls Birth of a Nation. Every racist cracker still sore from the Civil War takes it as a call to join them fellas in the white dresses, the Ku Klux Klan. Years since, white hoods are more in fashion than jazz. At 2 million strong, with rope and fire and bullets, those bigot boogeymen spelled trouble for any black soul too stubborn to head north. The latest, most certainly not last to join this craze, is Bernie Jones. The man grew up a slave, watched his people reach freedom, started a family in a new free world, just to end up like an overcooked steak. Back page news, next to an ad for cheap cologne. There's trickery afoot, and only one sleuth can suss out the case. Find out what happens next in Br'er Rabbit in the Jazz Age. Shame of the Zebra.
Take the place of dreams, and you can tell you're under the spell of the blue.